I woke because 3 men were arguing over who would get my boots after I died. A broad man checked my pulse and frowned. "Still breathing," he said. "We can fix that after dark." Memories that were not mine slid behind my eyes. 12 nobles dead in a ravine. A stable hand blamed for guiding them there. A trial that lasted less than an hour. The name Artem. The sentence? Death in 100 days. A pale status window appeared. Level 1, mana 0. Condition, starving. Broken ribs. Internal bleeding. Status, condemned prisoner. Then another message opened. Full day of imprisonment will be completed in 00018. Daily reward, 1 million EXP. The count belonged to the condemned mark, burned beneath the body's collarbone. It had been recording the registered prison day long before I opened my eyes. The final seconds passed, while the man explained that my ration belonged to him. At midnight, the prison bell sounded. Full day completed. 1 million EXP received. Level increased. 1 to 14. Heat tore through my body. My ribs shifted into place. The man reached for my bread. I caught his wrist. I meant to stop him. His feet left the floor, and his back struck the wall hard enough to shake dust from the ceiling. That was how Artem's second life began, inside the strongest conventional death prison in the Empire, with 0 mana, 99 days left to live, and a cell full of men who had lost interest in his boots. For several breaths, nobody moved. The man against the wall was named Rusk. The body's memories supplied the name, along with a collection of unpleasant facts. Rusk had been a dock enforcer before he opened a merchant's skull with a mooring hook. He was level 11, strong enough to rule weaker men, but not important enough to earn a private cell. His eyes rolled toward Artem's hand. Artem released him at once. Rusk dropped to the floor, wheezing. The other 2 cellmates backed away until their shoulders touched the opposite wall. One of them still held Artem's bread. He set it down very carefully, as though returning an offering to a shrine with a bad temper. Artem examined his fingers. They were thin, bruised, and crusted with dried blood. They did not look capable of lifting a grown man. That made the new strength more dangerous, not less. The level increase had given him free attribute points, but he had not placed them yet. Most of the improvement came from the levels themselves. His body felt lighter. Sounds had separated into layers. Water ticking from the ceiling, Rusk's ragged breath, bare feet shifting in the corridor, a guard scratching his beard beyond the bars. He opened his status and considered the available attributes: strength, agility, health, endurance, perception, will. Mana remained gray and unresponsive. When he focused on it, the system displayed a blunt explanation. No magical channels detected. Mana cannot be increased. That was almost comforting. At least the rules did not pretend he had options he lacked. Artem placed the largest share of his points into health. The internal bleeding faded to a dull pressure. He put the next share into endurance and perception, then divided what remained between agility and will. Strength received the smallest amount. Rusk watched him from the floor, trying to understand how a dying level 1 prisoner had thrown him with one hand. No status number floated above Artem's head. In this world, exact levels were private until 2 people entered a genuine hostile clash. Rusk had reached for bread, not attacked with killing intent, and so he had learned nothing except that Artem was no longer weak. That uncertainty was useful. "The bread stays here," Artem said. His voice came out rough from thirst. It still changed the cell. Rusk lowered his gaze. The other man nodded too quickly. Artem ate slowly. Silence served him better than gratitude or threats. It left the others free to imagine consequences worse than anything he might name. By morning, the story had already escaped the cell. Black Prison woke before sunrise. Chains rattled in 100 rooms. Guards struck bars with iron rods and ordered the condemned into the corridor. The prison had been carved into a mountain of dark basalt, its passages narrow and steep. Mana-suppressing lines glowed faintly between the stones, turning every wall into part of a vast spell. The air tasted of rust, boiled grain, and the underground river that carried waste away beneath the lower blocks. Artem joined the line, with his ankles chained and his wrists linked in front of him. The iron had felt impossibly heavy in the body's memories. Now, it was merely inconvenient. He kept his shoulders rounded and let the chain drag. A sudden display of power would bring questions before he understood who was allowed to ask them. The first block held 180 prisoners. Most were killers, deserters, bandits, or political inconveniences. Their levels ranged from 7 to 17. Artem could not see the numbers, but the body's memories and the way they moved gave him an approximate scale. They had thicker bodies than his, practiced balance, and a hard awareness of men accustomed to violence. Many stared at him. Rusk had not told them the truth. He had told them Artem used a hidden relic. That rumor protected Rusk's pride and made everyone else curious. A guard named Pell walked beside the breakfast carts. He had narrow shoulders, a copper whistle, and a mustache so carefully waxed that it seemed to hold his face together. Pell shoved a dented tin bowl through the bars of the dining pen. Artem accepted it and tried to scoop the porridge with the spoon chained to the table. The spoon folded around his fingers. He looked at it. Pell looked at it. The prisoner across the table stopped chewing. Pell snatched the ruined spoon away and replaced it with another. Artem held the second one closer to the bowl and used less pressure. Its handle bent anyway, slowly curling as if embarrassed. Pell's mustache twitched. "Do that again, and you eat with your hands." "That may be safer," Artem said. Pell brought a wooden ladle from the kitchen. Artem managed 3 mouthfuls before the bowl cracked beneath his thumb. The guard stared at the split metal, then at Artem's gaunt arms. Without another word, he set down a wooden bowl and walked away. A few prisoners laughed. They stopped when Artem glanced toward them, even though he had not intended the look as a warning. His new perception caught something else. At the far end of the pen, Rusk spoke with a bald prisoner, whose neck was nearly as wide as his head. The man was Merrick, known as Ox, level 17, and master of the 6 eastern cells. He controlled food, sleeping places, and the small trade in sharpened metal. Rusk kept his voice low, but Artem could hear enough. The hidden relic was valuable. Artem had no allies. Merrick intended to take both the relic and the credit for killing him. Artem finished the porridge, set the wooden bowl down intact, and spent the rest of the morning learning the prison's routine. Prisoners were counted 6 times a day. The outer gates opened only for supply wagons and official transfers. 3 internal walls divided the ordinary blocks from the iron block, the lower vaults, and the central tower. The tower housed Warden Malrek Vane and the prison core that powered every barrier. Black chains set into the walls could tighten or release through the core. If a riot began, the corridors could be sealed section by section and filled with burning vapor. Even at level 14, Artem could not walk out. He might overpower several guards, but the gatehouse held knights above level 30, and the outer defense had been designed for prisoners stronger than any of them. More important, the reward required him to remain inside the active prison boundary for a full day. 1 million experience for waiting. He had no intention of leaving early. During labor hour, prisoners carried basalt blocks from one side of the yard to the other. The work served no construction purpose. It exhausted bodies, revealed hidden strength, and gave guards a reason to use their rods. Artem chose a medium block and lifted it against his chest. It rose too quickly. He turned the movement into a stumble and let one knee touch the ground. The nearest guard laughed at the weak, condemned boy. Artem carried the block at the pace of the line and counted his steps. His body was powerful, but clumsy. When he pushed from the left foot, he overstepped. When he tightened his grip, stone powder gathered under his fingers. He spent the hour learning how little force was required to perform an ordinary action. Merrick watched from the shade beside the wall. The attack came after evening count. The eastern cells were returning through a passage barely wide enough for 3 men. Merrick arranged for a prisoner ahead of Artem to fall. The line compressed. A guard at the rear shouted. In that confusion, Rusk moved behind Artem with a strip of cloth, while Merrick stepped from an open doorway, holding a short spike made from a spoon handle. This time, the intention was unmistakable. Merrick lunged for the stomach. The world sharpened. A flash of information crossed between them as hostility became contact. Merrick, level 17. At the same moment, Merrick saw Artem's number. Artem, level 14. Relief passed across the large man's face. 14 was surprising, but it was not impossible. Merrick had 3 levels, 20 years of fighting, and twice Artem's mass. He twisted the spike upward toward the ribs. Artem moved aside too far. His shoulder struck the wall, but the weapon missed. Rusk tightened the cloth around his throat from behind. Artem hooked 2 fingers beneath it, pulled, and sent Rusk stumbling into Merrick's path. Merrick did not hesitate. He drove the spike around Rusk's body, using his own man as a shield. Artem saw the motion before it completed. His hand closed over Merrick's wrist. The sharpened metal stopped a finger's width from Artem's chest. Merrick tried to force it forward. Muscles rose along his forearm. His face reddened. Artem felt almost no pressure. That difference was dangerous. Level was not a simple measure of muscle, and Merrick possessed practice leverage. Artem did not. Yet, Artem's health, endurance, and newly improved physical foundation gave him more raw power than the number alone suggested. He turned Merrick's wrist as gently as he could. The spike snapped between their hands. Merrick's relief vanished. Artem struck him once in the sternum with an open palm. He intended to push the man away. Merrick crossed the corridor, hit the opposite wall, and slid down beside a drain. Rusk released the cloth and froze. A guard finally forced through the line, iron rod raised. He looked from Merrick to the broken spike, and then to Artem. What happened? Artem glanced at Rusk. Rusk swallowed. Ox slipped. The guard studied the body-shaped smear of dust on the wall. Very hard, Rusk added. The guard had seen stranger lies in Black Prison. He dragged Merrick by one ankle and ordered the line forward. At midnight, the bell sounded again. Full day of imprisonment completed. 1 million EXP received. Level increased 14 to 20. Artem's damaged shoulder healed before the echo faded. New strength settled into his limbs with a heavier, denser sensation than before. He distributed his points with the same priorities, keeping enough strength to prevent an obvious imbalance. Rusk lay awake on the other side of the cell. He had spent the evening telling himself Merrick would recover and return with more men. A key turned in the lock before dawn. Merrick entered with his chest bandaged and 6 prisoners behind him. One carried a length of chain, another held a shard of glass. Merrick had refused pain medicine so that his killing intent would remain clear. He wanted the entire cell to watch him restore his authority. He crossed the floor and grabbed Artem by the collar. Status resonance flashed. Artem, level 20. Merrick's hand loosened. He stared at the number, as if it had insulted him personally. He had touched Artem less than 12 hours earlier. He knew what he had seen. You were 14. Artem looked at the 7 men filling the doorway. None stood above level 16. Merrick was the only one who could have troubled yesterday's body, and yesterday was gone. You should have stayed in bed, Artem said. Merrick swung his fist anyway. Pride moved faster than sense. Artem caught the punch. This time he knew how much force the wrist could bear. He squeezed until Merrick's knees touched the floor, then took the chain from the second man before its owner understood he had moved. A small pull tore it from both hands. Artem folded the first link between his thumb and forefinger and let the broken halves fall. The sound was quiet. It frightened them more than a shout would have. He dragged Merrick upright by the front of his shirt and carried him to the open door. Merrick's boots scraped uselessly across the floor. Artem placed him in the corridor and released him. My food stays in my cell. My sleep stays quiet. You do not enter unless I call. Merrick clutched his wrist and nodded. Take the others. They left so quickly that Rusk had to flatten himself against the wall. The guard at the end of the corridor watched 7 violent men retreat from a prisoner who still looked half-starved. He reached for his whistle, considered the paperwork that would follow, and returned it to his mouth without blowing. From that morning onward, nobody in the eastern cells touched Artem's ration. Nobody tried to take his boots either. Rumors in prison moved faster than food and survived longer than men. By the third morning, Artem had become 3 different people, depending on which corridor told the story. In the western cells, he was a fallen noble hiding a forbidden body technique. Near the kitchens, he was an alchemist who had swallowed a beast core. The men who cleaned the drains insisted that he was already dead, and that the thing wearing his face had crawled up from the lower vaults. Artem preferred the third explanation. Ghosts were rarely asked to share their breakfast. The daily reward raised him to level 25 at the next midnight. His shoulders filled out. The hollows beneath his cheekbones became less severe, and the gray in his eyes no longer looked dull. A thin scar remained under his left eyebrow, one of the few marks the level increases did not erase. It gave his otherwise young face a harder line. He continued to hide what he could. He dragged his chains. He carried only the weight assigned to him. When guards watched, he breathed heavily after labor. The performance was imperfect, but most people saw what they expected to see. The prisoners expected a trick. The guards expected a hidden background. Nobody expected another million experience before dawn. On the 4th day, Pell struck Artem across the shoulders with an iron rod for returning a work block too quickly. The blow carried genuine hostility. Status resonance opened between them. Pell, level 13. Artem, level 28. The rod bounced from Artem's back. Pell's waxed mustache lost its shape as his mouth opened. Artem turned his head slowly. The guard took 1 step back, then remembered that 40 prisoners were watching. He raised the rod again, but the second strike never came. His hand remained in the air, while he tried to decide which was more dangerous, lowering it or following through. Artem made the decision easier. He picked up the basalt block and returned to the line. Pell lowered the rod and spent the rest of the hour striking men who could still be hurt. That evening, an officer summoned him to the guard room. Artem heard Pell arguing through the wall. The guard insisted the condemned boy had been level 28. Another guard reminded him that intake records listed level 1. Their captain asked whether Pell had been drinking furnace spirits again. The report still reached the central tower. Warden Malrek Vane read it over dinner. Malrek was 53, broad in the shoulders, and neat in every detail. His black hair had gone silver at the temples, and a dark green gem had been set into the skin above his right eyebrow. The gem connected him to Black Prison's core. Through it he could feel opened gates, broken seals, and large disturbances in the mana lines. He was level 65, a battle mage who had helped end 2 border revolts. He had accepted the post at Black Prison because prisoners produced better profit than dead rebels. The Empire paid to keep them contained. Noble spectators paid to watch them fight. Criminal families paid to deliver messages. The Treasury also funded official prison labor programs, while merchants bribed Malrek for access to cheap crews. He billed both sides for prisoners who never left their cells and kept the difference. A level 1 stable hand becoming level 28 in 4 days did not fit any profitable category. Malrek ordered the intake archive brought to him. The file confirmed what Pell had said. Artem had entered with no mana, no known training, severe injuries, and a level so low the measuring crystal barely responded. Malrek considered forged records, a concealed relic, an alchemical transformation, and possession by a hostile spirit. He did not consider an impossible reward for remaining in prison. Warden Malrek understood greed, violence, politics, and magic. A power that rewarded obedience to a sentence did not belong in his experience. He sent quiet instructions to the first block. Observe, provoke, do not kill until the cause is known. The order reached 3 prison gangs by supper. Artem noticed the change before anyone approached him. Men who usually fought over seating left the center bench empty. Conversation stopped when he passed, then resumed behind him. Rusk returned from the water line with his face pale and his bucket full, a combination that meant somebody had frightened him into usefulness. "They are coming tonight," Rusk murmured. Artem tore his bread in half. "Who?" Rusk named 3 cell leaders and 6 of their best fighters. He said they had been promised extra meat, reduced labor, and access to a woman from the service quarter if they made Artem reveal his relic. He told the story with nervous urgency, hoping information would purchase protection. Artem handed him the empty cup. "Bring water." He had expected gratitude, perhaps a place close to Artem when the attack began. Artem looked at the cup. Rusk took it and left. He was not a friend. He was a man who had helped strangle Artem 2 nights earlier and had now chosen a more comfortable method of survival. Artem would use the warning, but he would not confuse usefulness with loyalty. The attack began after the last patrol passed. 9 men entered through 3 doors opened with stolen keys. The guards at the corridor junction turned their backs. 2 attackers carried knives hammered from bed frames. One had wrapped his fists in copper wire. Their leader, Vel the Tanner, was level 22 and famous for removing skin from debtors without killing them too quickly. Artem sat on the lower bunk, with his ankle chain looped once around his hand. He had spent the afternoon testing its length. The chain allowed 3 full steps from the wall. The bunk was bolted down. A water channel ran along the left side of the cell. The ceiling was low enough that tall men could not raise their arms fully. Vel entered first and spread his men to both sides. "Give me the relic," he said. "I leave you enough fingers to eat." Artem rose. The chain slipped from the bunk with a dry scrape. "I do not have a relic." Vel smiled because he had expected a denial. He signaled with 2 fingers. The first knife came from Artem's right. He shifted inside the thrust and caught the attacker's elbow with both hands. His strength would have shattered the joint, so he redirected it instead, turning the man into the path of the second blade. Metal entered a shoulder. Both attackers cursed and tangled together. The copper-fisted prisoner rushed from the left, using the water channel to hide his steps. Artem saw the reflection first. He leaned back. The wrapped fist passed under his chin and struck the stone wall. Copper wire flattened. Knuckles broke. Artem hooked the short section of ankle chain behind the man's knee and pulled. The attacker hit the floor. Artem stepped over him and faced the next 3. His movements were faster now, but speed did not make them elegant. He overcommitted on the first turn and clipped the bunk with his hip. A knife sliced his shirt and drew a thin line across his ribs. He seized the wrist, but the attacker dropped the weapon into his other hand, a practiced trick that would have opened Artem's stomach the previous night. Perception gave warning. Agility supplied time. Artem slapped the second hand away and drove his forehead into the man's nose. The impact lifted the attacker from his feet. Artem winced as the body struck the rear wall. He still had to learn restraint. Vel entered the fight when 4 men were already down. He used a narrow blade coated with black grease and moved with more discipline than the others. His first feint targeted Artem's throat. The true cut swept low toward the inner thigh, where even a strong body could lose blood quickly. Artem jumped backward. His shoulders struck the bars. Vel changed direction without pause and drove the blade toward his eye. The knife stopped between 2 chain links. Artem had raised his bound wrists by instinct. Vel twisted, trying to free the point. Artem pulled the chain sideways. The weapon flew from Vel's hand and spun into the corridor. Status resonance flashed as Vel seized Artem's forearm. Vel, level 2022. Artem, level 28. The gang leader's pupils tightened. Pell's report had already reached him. He had expected 28. What frightened him was that the number had been 25 the previous day, according to another witness. "It is true," Vel whispered. Artem shoved him away. Vel rolled with the force, came up near the door, and shouted for everyone to retreat. One was too slow. Another had been promised enough meat to ignore sense. He picked up the poison knife and charged from behind. Artem heard the wet leather of his soul touch stone. He turned, caught the man's wrist, and drove it into the edge of the bunk. The blade fell. Artem wrapped the chain once around the attacker's chest, pivoted, and threw him into the 2 prisoners still standing. All 3 collapsed in the doorway. The fight ended with 7 men injured two already running, and Vel staring from the corridor. Artem bent, picked up the poison knife by its flat sides, and tossed it at Vel's feet. "Do not enter my cell again." Vel looked at the weapon, then at the men groaning behind Artem. He nodded once. The guards arrived after enough time had passed for the ambush to fail naturally. Captain Bran Orvik led them. He was a lean man with dark red hair cut close to the scalp, and a brass plate covering the left side of his jaw. A prisoner had once torn the original jaw away. Bran had responded by feeding the prisoner to the lower beasts and wearing the replacement as a warning. His eyes moved over the cell with professional interest. He did not ask who had started the fight. He asked how Artem had avoided the poison. "I did not touch the edge," Artem said. Bran glanced at the chain in Artem's hand. "You have used one before. I have had time to practice." 4 days? The prison is educational. Bran kicked the nearest one silent. He ordered Artem moved to an empty cell at the end of the corridor. The new cell had one bunk, one water bowl, and bars visible from the guard post. Artem accepted to move. Solitude reduced the number of knives within reach, and every part of the room remained inside the prison boundary. Bran watched him settle in. "Warden says you are to be observed." Artem sat on the bunk. "Then I hope he enjoys the view." Bran's brass jaw did not move when he smiled. At midnight, Artem reached level 32. The next night raised him to 35. By the end of the 7th full day, he was level 37. The changes could no longer be hidden by torn clothing. His back had straightened. The chain around his ankles no longer marked the skin. He moved with a controlled economy he had not possessed at the start, though the control came from daily practice rather than a gifted technique. He spent hours rolling a cup between his fingers without denting it, lifting the bunk one corner at a time, and swinging the ankle chain through the same narrow path until it stopped striking the wall. On the 7th afternoon, Red Joran came to the yard. Joran ruled the ordinary blocks. He was level 32, taller than Merrick, and built like a door reinforced with iron. His beard had once been black, but prison dust had turned it a permanent gray, except around the mouth, where it was stained red by the bitter leaf he chewed. A strip of cured leather covered his right ear. The ear itself had been bitten off during a siege. He had not joined the earlier ambush. Joran did not spend authority through other men when reputation required his own hand. The yard emptied around Artem before Joran reached him. Prisoners moved to the walls. Guards remained on the walkway above, crossbows resting on the rail. Captain Bran stood among them. He had arranged the meeting and made no effort to hide it. Joran stopped 3 paces away. "You have made my block quiet," he said. Artem sat on a stone bench and worked a crack from a wooden cup with his thumbnail. "You are welcome." Several prisoners looked down to hide their reactions. Joran spat red juice into the dust. "Quiet men stop paying." "That sounds like your problem." Joran's expression tightened. He drew a curved prison knife from inside his belt. Unlike the crude spikes used by most inmates, this blade had a proper edge and a wrapped handle. A guard had sold it to him. Artem set the cup beside him and stood. Joran attacked with the confidence of a man who had killed trained soldiers. His first step was short, almost lazy. The second covered the entire distance. The knife slashed across Artem's eyes, forcing his head back, then reversed toward the throat. Artem caught Joran's forearm. Status resonance opened. Joran, level 32. Artem, level 37. The red stain around Joran's mouth went still. Yesterday, they said 34. Yesterday was yesterday. Joran drove his forehead toward Artem's nose. Artem shifted aside and let the strike pass. Joran used the turn to wrench his arm free, cut low, and step behind him. Technique narrowed the difference between their levels. Artem had more speed and strength, but Joran knew how to use a knife in a crowded space. The blade touched Artem's side. It failed to sink deeply, yet the sting warned him that careless confidence could still draw blood. Joran expected Artem to retreat. Artem stepped closer. He trapped the knife arm between their bodies, hooked one foot behind Yoren's heel, and pushed at the shoulder. The motion was not a formal throw. It was an answer built from watching men fight in the corridor and testing balance during labor. Joren hit the ground. Artem kept hold of the wrist and pressed the hand flat against the stone. The knife scraped loose. Joren punched upward with his free hand. Artem absorbed the blow on his shoulder, caught the fist, and pinned that arm too. For the first time in years, the ruler of the ordinary blocks lay on his back, with both wrists controlled by someone who did not appear to be exerting himself. Artem could have broken the arms. He could have crushed Yoren's throat. Neither action brought experience, and both created more work. He released him and stepped away. Joren remained on the ground for a moment, breathing through his nose. The prisoners by the wall waited to see whether he would attack again. He did not. Artem picked up his cup. "My cell, my food, and my time do not concern you," he said. "Keep your block. Keep your payments. Leave me out of both." Joren rose, dusted his shirt, and collected the knife. He had lost in front of everyone, but Artem had given him a path that did not require surrendering the entire block. He took it. Agreed. A new prisoner arrived that evening, a thin thief with bright yellow hair and more courage than information. He entered the dining pen, saw the empty space beside the window, and demanded that the man sitting there move. Every prisoner within hearing distance stepped away from Artem at the same time. The thief mistook the movement for support. He grabbed Artem's shoulder and tried to pull him from the bench. Artem did not move. The thief pulled harder. His feet slid across the floor. Artem looked at the hand on his shoulder. The thief followed his gaze, released him, and asked in a much smaller voice whether the place near the waste bucket was available. It was. By the next morning, a clean circle surrounded Artem wherever he sat. He had not gained a single friend. He had gained space. On the 8th day, Warden Malrek stopped observing from a distance. The order came during morning count. 12 guards entered the first block, wearing full helmets and carrying hooked spears. Captain Bran walked behind them with a leather folder under one arm. "Prisoner Artem," he called. "By authority of the warden, you are transferred to the iron block." The corridor became quiet enough for Artem to hear a rat inside the wall. The iron block was where Black Prison kept men who could not be housed beside ordinary criminals. Fallen knights, battlefield sorcerers, famous assassins, and war chiefs lived there in single cells of layered steel. Several had levels above 40. The first block spoke of them, the way villages spoke of winter wolves. Artem stood and presented his wrists. He could have resisted the guards, but the transfer remained inside the same active boundary. A stronger block offered better information, better opponents, and fewer foolish attacks from men who had not understood the first 7 examples. Bran locked a second chain around his waist. "You look pleased," the captain said. "I was beginning to think the prison had run out of rooms." Bran gave him a long look and led him below. The iron block sat beneath the western yard. Its central corridor was wide enough for armored carts, and every door had 3 separate locks. Blue suppression runes burned in the floor. They pressed on the body like deep water, crushing spell formation and draining loose mana into copper channels. Artem felt nothing except warmth beneath his bare feet. The guards noticed. One young knight checked the rune plate, convinced it had failed. Bran struck the back of his helmet and ordered him to keep moving. Prisoners watched through narrow door slots. Artem saw pieces of them. A golden eye, a tattooed cheek, fingers scarred by acid, a woman's white braid. These people did not shout at new arrivals. They measured them. At the end of the block stood an open common chamber where 5 prisoners ate under guard. The largest sat alone at a stone table. Dagon Krail had once commanded the 9th Royal Lancers. He had murdered his own general during a retreat and carried the general's banner through 3 enemy lines before surrendering. His hair was silver, despite his 40 years, braided tightly down his back. One eye remained blue. The other had clouded white after a mage burned half his face. He was level 48. Artem could not see the number yet, but everything about Dagon suggested trained danger. He sat with perfect balance. His spoon moved without sound. Even the prisoners who hated him kept a respectful distance. Bran stopped beside the table. Dagon, the warden has sent you a new neighbor. Dagon looked at Artem once, from bare feet to black hair. He will be dead by supper. That prediction has become expensive, Bran said. Artem was placed in a cell opposite Dagon's. The inner lock turned, then the outer one. Then a bar dropped into the stone with a heavy final sound. His new cell had no window and no movable furniture. The bed was a stone shelf. A black ring in the floor held a chain thick enough to moor a river barge. Artem's ankle shackles were attached to it. A guard slid a cup of water through the hatch. Warden says no food today. Artem drank and returned the cup unbroken. The guard looked disappointed. Malrek's first iron block experiment was starvation. His second was isolation. His third arrived just before midnight, when a physician in a waxed coat entered with 4 guards and demanded a blood sample. Artem allowed the needle to touch his arm. It bent against the skin. The physician tried a thicker one. That needle bent too. Captain Bran handed him a small chisel. Artem looked at the instrument. Are you collecting blood or opening a mine? The physician did not find it amusing. Bran did, though his brass jaw hid most of the result. They eventually drew a few drops from an old cut near Artem's ribs. The blood showed no alchemical stimulant, no demonic residue, and no mana. It was ordinary human blood, with an extraordinary concentration of vitality. At midnight, Artem reached level 40. By the 10th day, he was level 45. Malrek ordered his meals restored. Starvation had failed to weaken him. Instead, the body's recovery made each missed ration less important. Artem still accepted food when it came. Immense levels did not make hunger pleasant, and patience was easier with something in the stomach. Dagon watched him through the door slot. The former Lancer had seen strong men before. Strength changed posture. Speed changed the eyes. Artem was changing between one night and the next, and the differences were too clean to be explained by medicine. On the 11th morning, the iron block doors opened for exercise. Prisoners were released one at a time into a circular yard beneath a barred ceiling. Guards lined the upper gallery. Warden Malrek stood behind reinforced glass with the green core gem glowing above his brow. Dagon entered last. Bran had promised him a month without suppression chains if he broke Artem's legs. Dagon did not care about the reward. He cared that every prisoner in the block had begun watching Artem instead of him. He approached without a weapon. Stand, he said. Artem remained seated against the wall, rotating one wrist to loosen the chain. Why? Dagon's white eye gave his face a permanent look of contempt. Because I told you. That does not improve the reason. A prisoner in the gallery coughed into his fist. Dagon turned his head slightly, and the sound stopped. He faced Artem again. This block has one law. Nobody stands above me. Artem rose, mostly because sitting made the next part inconvenient. Dagon attacked with no warning. His heel cut through the space where Artem's knee had been. Artem withdrew the leg. Dagon stepped inside, drove an elbow toward the throat, and used the expected block to seize Artem's wrist. The movement flowed into a shoulder lock, refined through decades of military training. Status resonance flashed. Dagon Krail, level 48. Artem, level 47. Dagon's good eye narrowed. For the first time since entering prison, Artem had met someone whose level and skill both exceeded his own. The lock tightened. Artem's shoulder reached its limit. Raw strength could tear free, but doing so from the wrong angle would dislocate the joint. Artem dropped his weight instead, stepped around Dagon's hip, and struck the back of his knee. Dagon released before the blow landed fully, and turned the retreat into a kick. Artem raised an arm. The impact drove him 2 steps sideways. Dagon followed with a straight punch. Artem caught it, but the former Lancer opened his hand, trapped Artem's fingers, and pulled him into a rising knee. The knee struck his ribs. The stone wall behind him cracked when his back hit it. Pain spread through Artem's side. Nothing broke, but the difference between surviving a blow and understanding it became clear. Dagon did not waste the opening. He crossed the yard and aimed a palm at Artem's jaw. Artem ducked. The palm broke stone from the wall. Artem seized Dagon's braid and pulled. It was an ugly answer, but an effective one. Dagon's head snapped back. Artem hooked his ankle chain around the former Lancer's forearm and stepped behind him. Dagon twisted, avoiding the bind, then grabbed the chain with both hands and dragged Artem forward. They collided shoulder to shoulder. Dagon tried to sweep the legs. Artem had seen the setup twice. He widened his stance, accepted the pressure, and drove a short punch into Dagon's side. The former Lancer blocked with his elbow. The force still lifted him from the floor. He landed in a crouch, boots cutting twin lines through the dust. The spectators leaned toward the bars. This was no alley beating. Dagon's technique kept turning Artem's superior recovery and rising strength into awkward positions. Artem's speed forced Dagon to abandon combinations he had used for years. Dagon attacked the chain instead of the body. He stamped on the loose section, pinning it, then rushed while Artem's left ankle was fixed. He stepped toward it, let the chain slacken, and met Dagon at close range. The head strike came first. Artem caught it on his forehead. Dagon's nose broke. Artem wrapped both hands around Dagon's upper arm, turned with the same hit motion he had used against Joran, and threw. Dagon corrected in the air. He landed on one foot and reached for Artem's throat. Artem pulled the pin chain. The link slid from beneath Dagon's boot. His support foot shifted half an inch. That was enough. Artem stepped through the grasp, placed a palm against Dagon's chest, and pushed with controlled force. The former Lancer crossed the yard and struck the opposite wall. He did not collapse. He dug his fingers into the stone and stopped himself, leaving 5 grooves. Blood ran from his nose. He smiled for the first time. Again. Artem's ribs ached. His shoulder had begun to swell. He understood more about balance than he had 10 minutes earlier. "Tomorrow," he said. Dagon's smile vanished. "You think you can postpone me? At midnight, I will be stronger. It would be rude not to let you prepare." A laugh escaped from somewhere in the cells, then another. Even several guards turned their faces away. Dagon wiped his nose with the back of his hand. He charged once more. This time, Artem did not retreat. He met the first grip, turned his wrist along the pressure instead of against it, and used the chain to bind Dagon's elbow. The former Lancer tried to shift his weight. Artem stamped beside the heel, blocked the step, and drove him face first into the sand. Dagon attempted to rise. Artem placed one knee between his shoulder blades and pulled the chain tight enough to control both arms. The former Lancer strained. The chain link sang. He could not move. Artem released him before a joint broke. The fight had lasted less than 4 minutes. It taught Artem more than every earlier attack combined. Dagon stood slowly. His pride had been injured more severely than his body, but he did not make a second challenge. He returned to his cell without speaking. Warden Malric watched from behind the glass, one hand resting on the core gem. At intake, Artem had been level 1. 10 days later, he had fought a level 48 Royal Lancer and won. Malric no longer believed in a concealed relic. Relics could amplify strength or hide status, but they did not rebuild a body in measured jumps every midnight. He began to suspect the prison itself. The following days changed the Iron Block's order. Dagon kept his table, and the Iron Block kept its old routines. Artem chose no attendance and issued no claim of rule. Food still began appearing outside his cell before the guards delivered rations. Prisoners left the exercise yard when he entered. Arguments stopped when his door opened. They called him the King of Black Prison in whispers. Artem ignored the title. A narrow-faced prisoner named Jory became especially useful. He swept the corridor near Artem's cell, warned him of inspections, and reported which guards accepted bribes. Jory had survived 8 years by making himself helpful to whoever was strongest. On the 13th day, he sold Warden Malric a list of Artem's habits. The list explained when Artem trained, how he distributed food, and which wall he listened to during guard changes. It contained no important secret, because Artem had never practiced anything important while Jory watched. That evening, Jory placed a cup of clean water outside the cell and found Artem waiting beside the door. "How much did he pay?" Artem asked. Jory's face emptied. He tried to deny it. Artem named the guard who had carried the message, and the exact moment Jory had left the laundry line. Perception had made secrecy difficult around him. Jory began promising loyalty. Artem opened the hatch, took the water, and said, "Next time, sell him something worth buying." He closed the hatch. Jory spent the night sitting against the opposite wall, waiting for punishment that never came. By morning, the absence of revenge had frightened him more than broken fingers would have. On the 15th day, Artem reached level 55. Captain Bran arrived after breakfast with a disciplinary order. "You are sentenced to 15 days in solitary confinement," he announced. "No yard, no visitors. 1 ration each evening." Artem looked up from the chain link he had been balancing on one finger. 15 full days? Bran mistook the question for mockery. "Make it 20. Artem's expression brightened before he could stop it. The captain stared. "You are the first prisoner I have met who looks happier when punished. The prison has unusual incentives." Bran ordered 6 guards to move him to the lower isolation cells. As Artem walked out, every door slot in the iron block opened. The iron block offered only measuring looks. These were killers watching the strongest prisoner leave, each wondering whether the old order might return in his absence. Dagon stood behind his bars with one blue eye fixed on Artem. There was respect in the look, but no loyalty. Artem preferred it honest. The lower isolation block had been built for mages. Its walls were lined with black salt and copper. 3 suppression fields overlapped beneath the floor, strong enough to collapse active spells and drain a court sorcerer unconscious within an hour. Chains descended from the ceiling and locked around Artem's wrists, ankles, waist, and throat. Each link carried runes designed to consume mana whenever the prisoner resisted. The guards tightened them until the metal bit into his skin. Nothing happened. The runes glowed, searched for power that did not exist, and faded. Captain Bran checked the control plate. "You feel no pressure? The collar is uncomfortable. It is supposed to stop your heart if you cast." "Then I will avoid casting." Bran's brass jaw clicked when he clenched his teeth. The door sealed. Food did not arrive that evening. Malrak had changed the sentence from isolation to controlled deprivation. He wanted to know whether hunger interrupted the midnight growth. The prison physician expected Artem's body to consume itself under the demands of repeated transformation. Instead, the 16th reward raised him to level 57 and repaired the damage from the day. His body still needed food, but health and endurance had turned starvation into a slow inconvenience. He drank from the wall pipe and spent the next morning learning the weight of the ceiling chains. Each wrist chain ran through a separate iron wheel. Pulling one shifted the others. Artem tested the system with small movements and listened to the groan of metal above. He could have torn the anchors free by the 18th day. He did not. A broken cell might be used as grounds for an emergency transfer, and the prison remained more valuable intact. On the 18th morning, the door opened. Guards brought a hood, a heavier waist chain, and the first full meal Artem had seen since entering Black Prison. Roast meat, white bread, and a bowl of thick stew waited on a tray. He looked from the food to Captain Bran. "The warden wants something." "He wants you fed." "That is more suspicious." Bran unlocked the ceiling chains. "Eat. You are fighting tonight." The meal came from Black Prison's hidden arena. Beneath the central tower, Malrek had converted an old execution chamber into a circular pit. Noble spectators entered through a tunnel from outside the mountain. They sat behind mirrored wards, drank expensive wine, and wagered on prisoners whose official records claimed they died of fever or disciplinary injuries. Artem had heard enough through pipes and guard conversations to understand the business. He had never seen the arena itself. The hood came off beneath red lamps. The pit was 40 paces across, with a sand floor stained dark in several places. Iron grates covered the walls. Behind them, silhouettes shifted in private viewing rooms. Artem could hear coins, glasses, and excited whispers. The people paying to watch him believed he was a mysterious body cultivator, around level 40. Malrek stood in a balcony above the main gate. Green fire moved across the gem in his brow. "Prisoner Artem," he announced, "survive, and you receive food for the remainder of your sentence." Artem flexed his hands. "And if I refuse? You return to isolation without water." The far gate rose before Artem could answer. Something dragged claws through the sand. The Iron Maw had once been a mountain predator. Prison alchemists had enlarged it with beast cores and covered its spine with iron plates. It stood as high as a horse at the shoulder, with 6 legs, a blunt armored skull, and a mouth that opened sideways into 4 hooked jaws. Broken chain hung from its neck. Its level was 56. Artem was level 60. The difference should have favored him. The beast had spent its whole life killing. Artem had spent 18 days learning not to crush cups. The Iron Maw charged. Its front claws tore trenches through the sand. Artem moved left. The beast corrected instantly, using the middle pair of legs to pivot, while the rear pair drove it forward. Its skull struck Artem across the hip. He left the ground, crossed half the pit, and landed on one shoulder. The mirrored rooms erupted with cheers. Artem rolled before the jaws closed where his head had been. 4 teeth cut through sand and struck stone below. He seized the broken chain around the beast's neck and pulled himself beneath its body, where the armor plates did not overlap. A rear leg kicked him in the ribs. He blocked with both forearms. The impact drove him through the sand and opened the skin above one elbow. The injury began closing at once, but the beast gave him no time to study it. The Iron Maw turned and released a bellow that shook dust from the lamps. A collar around its neck flashed. Alchemical fluid entered its veins. The creature's muscles swelled. Its level remained 56, but pain and restraint vanished from its movements. Malrek was not testing whether Artem could defeat the beast under fair conditions. He was testing how Artem responded when the prison changed the conditions during the fight. The Iron Maw charged again. Artem waited longer this time. He watched the front claws, then the shoulders, then the movement of sand beneath the middle legs. The beast could turn sharply, only when the left middle foot planted. He stepped toward the charge. The spectators shouted. Even Captain Bran leaned over the rail. At the last instant, Artem dropped to one knee, caught the hanging chain with both hands, and pulled sideways toward the planted leg. The Iron Maw's own momentum turned its head. Its front claws missed. The middle leg twisted under the body. Bone broke with a sound like wet timber. The beast rolled. Artem released the chain and ran along its armored side before it could crush him. One plate had lifted near the shoulder. He drove his fingers beneath the edge. The iron was bolted into bone. The plate tore free with blood and a spray of broken rivets. The Iron Maw screamed and whipped its rear body around. Its tail struck Artem in the chest. Spikes ripped through his shirt and carried him into the arena wall. Stone cracked behind him. For several seconds, breath would not enter his lungs. The beast rose on 5 legs. Rage and drugs pushed it past the broken limb. It lowered its armored skull and scraped the sand. Artem looked at the plate still in his hand. The creature had reach, natural weapons, and no concern for injury. A direct contest wasted his advantage. He threw the plate. It struck the collar. Not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to twist the metal. One alchemical tube tore free. Blue fluid sprayed across the beast's eye. The Iron Maw jerked its head. Artem crossed the pit before the spectators saw him move. He stepped onto the beast's front leg, climbed the sloped armor, and wrapped the broken neck chain around the base of the exposed plate. The beast reared. Artem jumped over the skull, landed behind the shoulders, and pulled the chain across the wound. The links bit into flesh. The Iron Maw bucked, rolled, and slammed its back toward the wall. Artem released one hand, swung around the neck, and avoided being crushed. He planted both feet against the armored jaw and pulled the chain in the opposite direction. The collar twisted farther. A second tube broke. The creature's drugged strength surged out of rhythm. Its legs struck too early. Its jaws snapped at empty air. Artem used the erratic movement to tighten the chain until it locked beneath the lower jaw. He could have pulled until the neck broke. The armor made that slow. Instead, he used the chain to force the head upward and drove his heel into the exposed joint beneath the skull. The first kick stunned the beast. The second collapsed the front legs. The third broke through the weakened bone. The iron maw hit the sand and did not rise. Silence spread through the viewing chambers. Artem remained beside the corpse, breathing hard. Blood from the tail wound ran down his chest. His arms trembled from controlling the chain at full tension. He had won, with a level advantage, but the fight had required observation, adaptation, and a willingness to move close to four jaws. A small notification appeared. Skill proficiency increased through repeated action. Chain handling, basic. Close combat, basic. Combat perception, basic. No special reward followed. The experience from the kill was so small beside the daily million that it did not change his level. That was exactly as it should be. Malrek clapped once from the balcony. Impressive. Artem looked up. A few nobles laughed behind the mirrors. Malrek did not. The warden had expected fear, gratitude, or anger. Artem's calm made the victory less useful. Spectators paid more when prisoners believed survival depended on pleasing them. "You will fight again," Malrek said. "Then improve the meal." Captain Bran escorted Artem back to isolation. The guards gave the dead beast a wide circle. One of them stared at the chain marks around its neck, then at Artem's wrists. The next midnight raised Artem to level 62. The wounds closed. His new skills remained. He spent the following day reproducing the movements in his cell, using the ceiling chains as resistance. On the 20th day, he reached level 63. That was the first day Warden Malrek entered his cell in person. The green gem above Malrek's eyebrow lit the room. 3 layers of barrier floated around him, transparent as thin ice. Captain Bran and 8 armored guards waited outside. Artem sat on the stone bed. Malrek studied him with the detached expression of a physician examining a disease. "You have no mana," the warden said. Your needles confirmed it. No relic, no potion, no inherited body art. Yet your level increases at a rate that should be impossible. Artem said nothing. Malrek continued. He mentioned the midnight pattern, the prison boundary, and the fact that every increase had occurred after a completed day. His conclusions were incomplete, but no longer foolish. "This place is feeding you," he said. Artem glanced at the wall pipe. Not generously. Malrek's barrier flickered as his irritation touched the core. "I can move you. You can try." The warden smiled without warmth. "I do not need to know how your power works. I only need to remove the condition it requires." He left the cell and ordered a transfer prepared. For 10 days, Malrek tested routes and gathered a convoy strong enough to carry a level 63 prisoner. He told the guards Artem was being moved to a deeper Imperial facility. He told the Empire Artem had developed a contagious curse. He told the prisoners nothing. During those 10 days, Artem continued to grow. Level 66, level 69, level 71, level 74. On the 30th day, he reached level 77. The transfer began before dawn. Black chains covered Artem from shoulders to ankles. 6 iron collars connected him to a reinforced wagon. 20 guards surrounded it, including 4 knights above level 35. Captain Bran rode beside the rear wheel. Malrek followed on a black horse, one hand pressed to the core gem so he could command the gates. The convoy passed through the first internal wall. Prisoners crowded the bars, watching in silence. It crossed the western yard and entered the gatehouse tunnel. Artem felt the prison boundary ahead. The system did not hide the consequence. Warning: leaving the active boundary will suspend daily imprisonment reward. Incomplete day will not be counted. The outer gate began to rise. Sunlight entered the tunnel in a narrow white line. It was the first natural light Artem had seen in 30 days. The guards tightened formation. Malrek watched from behind. He expected resistance and had prepared for it. Rune plates covered the wagon floor. The gatehouse contained 2 battle golems. Crossbow teams waited above the exit. Artem stood. The wagon's iron braces groaned. Captain Bran drew his sword. "Sit down." Artem bent his wrists apart. The black chain between them snapped. He tore the waist collar free, caught the hanging length, and swung it. The chain struck the wagon roof. Iron folded. Guards jumped back as wood and metal burst outward. The first knight lunged with a spear. Artem stepped inside the point and tapped the shaft with one hand. The weapon spun from the knight's grip and embedded itself in the ceiling. A battle golem dropped from an alcove. Its stone fist descended. Artem caught it. The tunnel shook. Dust fell. The golem's arms stopped above his head. Artem turned the wrist, stepped past the elbow, and pulled. The entire construct left its feet and crashed into the second golem. Malrek activated the floor runes. Green fire climbed the walls and closed around Artem. It was mana designed to burn flesh while leaving chains intact. Artem walked through it. The fire blackened his shirt. His skin reddened, then began to heal. Artem reached the line of sunlight and stopped with one foot a handspan from the boundary. Freedom waited beyond it. So did the end of the reward. He turned around. The surviving guards raised weapons. Nobody moved first. Artem walked back through the tunnel, stepped over the broken wagon, and past Warden Malrek without striking him. "Where are you going?" Malrek demanded. "Back to my cell." "You can leave." "Not today." The warden's face changed as understanding arrived. He was staying because every day inside made him stronger. Malrek pointed toward the gate. "You will rot in here until you die." Artem paused beside the wrecked golems. "That is the first profitable offer you have made." He continued inward. Captain Bran stared after him, sword still raised. Artem returned to the lower block, entered his cell, and pulled the bent door closed behind himself. By evening, every prisoner in Black Prison knew what had happened. Their strongest man had reached the outer gate, seen daylight, and chosen the cage. For the first time, Warden Malrek understood that he no longer possessed a prisoner. He possessed a disaster that wanted the building left standing. After the failed transfer, Black Prison changed its habits around Artem. The guards no longer entered his corridor in pairs. They came in groups of 10, opened his food hatch with poles, and left before he approached the door. Captain Bran stopped making threats he could not enforce. Warden Malrek moved his sleeping quarters from the central tower to the core chamber, and surrounded himself with barriers, even while eating. The prisoners adapted faster. They had lived their whole lives beneath stronger men. Once the strongest man became obvious, obedience required no meeting and no oath. A cook from the Western Bloc began placing the least spoiled meat on Artem's tray. Labor gangs swept the passage outside his cell. Men who had screamed through the night for years lowered their voices when they passed his door. Nobody did it out of affection. Jory continued to carry information and continued to sell pieces of it elsewhere. Dagon controlled the iron block because Artem had no interest in counting rations or settling arguments. Red Joran collected payments in the ordinary cells, but he stopped taking anything from the corridor that led below. Each man preserved a little authority by acknowledging the one person above them. Artem accepted food, warnings, and silence. He promised nothing in return. The title of king spread anyway. On the 33rd day, 2 prisoners dragged an upholstered chair into the lower yard. The chair had gold thread on the arms, and one leg hastily repaired with rope. It had been stolen from Warden Malrek's consultation room. They placed it beneath the wall and stepped back. Artem entered the yard, looked at the chair, and sat on a plain stone step beside it. Nobody touched either seat after that. The chair gathered dust. The step became more sacred than the prison chapel. Artem spent the middle weeks training and preparing for the day the gates stopped mattering. His levels provided capacity, but capacity unused remained clumsy. He practiced moving through narrow passages at different speeds. He suspended stone blocks from chains and struck them without shattering them, then struck them hard enough to split only the center. He repeated Dagon's wrist turns from memory, correcting angles until they no longer strained his joints. He studied the rhythm of guards with swords, the stance of spear knights, and the way battle mages kept distance while forming spells. Instruction came from observation. He copied, failed in private, corrected the movement, and repeated it until the result belonged to him. The prison gave him materials because it had been designed to resist violent people. Every chain became a training tool. Every locked gate became a measure of control. Every attempted restraint showed him where force gathered and where metal failed. At level 80, he could tear a cell door from its frame. He learned to open it without bending the hinges. At level 84, he could cross the lower yard before a thrown cup hit the floor. He learned to stop without cracking the stone beneath his feet. Training occupied his body. The quiet hours went to information. From discarded supply sheets, arguments carried through speaking tubes, and papers left inside the wrecked transfer wagon, Artem assembled a practical map of the region. The nearest market town, Greybank, lay 22 miles east. The western estates where the 12 nobles had died stood 4 days beyond it, by ordinary wagon. A silver crown could buy a plain cloak, a week of bread, and several nights under a roof. He memorized patrol roads, toll bridges, and the name of the noble heir who had benefited from the old trial. Lord Evren Halvek had inherited the western estates, and now directed the regional imperial survey office from there. The transfer wagon had held a weather-stained roadmap. Artem copied it in charcoal onto a strip of linen and hid it inside the lower gatehouse. After Malrek abandoned the arena counting room, Artem added an old wool cloak, dried rations, and 12 silver crowns from the warden's unrecorded betting cash. The amount was small beside the wagers placed on his death. He considered it delayed wages. At level 89, on the 40th day, he could hear the central core through 3 walls. It produced a constant low vibration, like a giant sleeping under the mountain. Maintenance notes explained why Malrek had not simply destroyed it. The visible prison was only the core's upper function. The same sphere anchored deep seals beneath the mountain and regulated pressure in an underground river. A sudden rupture could collapse the western valley and release creatures that had never been brought into the ordinary blocks. The core also protected itself against deliberate shutdown. Bypassing those safeguards required imperial codes, several linked operators, and weeks of preparation. Warden Malrek responded to each change by relying less on men and more on the prison itself. He sealed corridors behind Artem. He activated pressure fields meant to pin high-level beasts. Artem sat inside one and ate lunch, while the ruins overheated. He sent 2 iron golems into the lower yard. Artem stepped between them, redirected the first punch into the second golem's chest, and left both constructs tangled against the wall. He did not destroy them. Repairs would keep the prison occupied, and intact systems mattered until the sentence ended. Malrek tried poison next. The physician mixed deathroot into Artem's stew. Artem smelled the bitter oil before the hatch opened. He ate 3 spoonfuls, waited for the guards to watch his reaction, and carried the bowl to the door. "Too much salt," he said. The physician spent the following hour checking the kitchen, while Artem's health burned the poison out of his blood. Malrek stopped wasting expensive toxins after that. The warden's last useful weapon was the official structure of the prison. A condemned mark was a judicial contract burned into the body and copied into the prison core at intake. Once accepted, the sentence could end in only 3 ways. The registered execution began, the prisoner died during an authorized emergency action, or the prisoner accepted a sealed commutation with marked blood. Even the emperor could issue a pardon, only as an offer. The prisoner's consent completed it. The rule existed to stop wardens and noble families from quietly rewriting sentences after the gates closed. That safeguard prevented Malrek from simply revoking Artem's status to interrupt the reward. an early execution still required an imperial seal. If Malrek murdered him without one, investigators would arrive, the hidden arena accounts would be opened, and several noble patrons would protect themselves by blaming the warden. Malrek could send assassins, arrange accidents, or manipulate fights, but he could not lawfully erase the sentence from the core. Artem understood those limits from overheard orders and the body's legal memories. Malrek knew the same law was now protecting the man he wanted dead. Their conflict became a contest of days. On day 42, the warden opened the deepest beast vault. The creature inside was called the Grave Burrower. It had no eyes, 8 shovel-shaped limbs, and a shell thick enough to turn siege bolts. Prison workers used smaller members of its species to expand tunnels. This one had eaten 3 handlers and reached level 54 before Malrek sealed it away. He released it into the lower labor passage while Artem was returning from the yard. Its shell scraped both walls. Its mouth opened beneath the front plates and sprayed a cloud of digestive mist. Guards sealed the rear door, trapping 30 men with the creature and Artem. The men crowded behind him by instinct. The men behind him received no promise of protection. Artem stepped forward because the burrower blocked his route to the cell, and its acid was already eating toward foundations connected to the prison core. He walked into the mist. The acid smoked against his skin. His shirt dissolved. The burrower lunged, opening a ring of grinding teeth. Artem struck the center of its shell once. The impact passed through the armor and shattered the softer body beneath. The creature stopped with its mouth around his arm, then collapsed so abruptly that its rear plates folded over the front. The prisoners behind him had prepared to witness a battle. They saw one punch. Artem pulled his arm from the dead mouth and wiped digestive slime on a torn strip of cloth. "Open the door," he called to the guards. The rear seal lifted at once. After that, Malrek stopped using the lower beasts. He had finally reached the point where an enemy dangerous enough to inconvenience Artem would also threaten the prison itself. The days continued. Level 92, level 94, level 96. Artem's aura became harder to conceal. It was not mana. The suppression runes could not drain it, because it came from the pressure of a body and will grown far beyond normal limits. Weak prisoners felt it before he entered a room. Their breathing shortened, their shoulders tightened. Rats left his corridor. The more disciplined guards could stand near him, but their hands remained close to weapons they knew would not help. On the 49th night, Artem sat alone in the yard beneath the barred ceiling. Rainwater leaked through the mountain vents and struck the stone in slow drops. He had reached level 99. The number carried weight in this world. Only a handful of living people were believed to stand at that height. Their names appeared in military histories. Kingdoms changed plans when one of them crossed a border. Artem had reached it by waiting in a cell for 7 weeks. The prison bell sounded at midnight. Full day of imprisonment completed. 1 million EXP received. Level increased 99 to 100. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Black Prison reacted. The measuring crystal in the intake hall split from top to bottom. Every suppression rune in the lower block flared white. The central core issued a warning tone that had not sounded since its construction. Unknown threat classification. Human status unresolved. Containment level insufficient. Artem's aura escaped his control in a single expanding wave. Dust lifted from the yard. Chains hanging from the walls trembled. The rainwater striking the floor spread outward in perfect circles. Prisoners in the surrounding blocks dropped to their knees, some from pressure, others from instinct. Guards gripped the railings to remain upright. In the beast vaults, creatures that had screamed every night went silent. The wave reached Warden Malrek inside the core chamber. His barriers bent inward. The green gem above his brow cracked at one edge. He stared at the status mirror connected to the intake crystal. The mirror displayed a number no official record contained. 100. Malrek had built his life on measured power. Levels had limits. Bodies had limits. Empires survived because even their greatest monsters could be placed somewhere on a scale. Artem had stepped beyond the scale while sitting under a leaking roof. The wave passed through the mountain. Far beyond Black Prison, imperial obelisks used to track national-level threats, lit one after another. Scribes rushed from sleeping quarters. Needles spun past their final marks. One obelisk cracked at its base and carved a new line into its own stone. Source: Black Prison. Classification: Human. Level: 100. In the yard, Artem closed his hand. The pressure withdrew. Prisoners remained kneeling. A guard on the upper gallery had bitten through his lip without noticing. Artem looked at the cracked stones around his feet. Reaching level 100 had made concealment impossible, but the daily reward was intact. The core still vibrated. The official mark remained warm beneath his collarbone. He returned to his cell. As he passed the upholstered chair, every prisoner lowered his head. Artem sat on the same stone step as before, and finished the cup of water he had left there. Captain Brand came down after an hour. His brass jaw had been polished to a mirror, the sort of pointless task a man chose when every useful option had failed. "What are you?" he asked. Artem set down the cup. "Still a prisoner. There has never been a level 100 human. There is now." Bran looked toward the tower. The Empire felt that. Then the warden will have company. The next midnight arrived, with guards posted at every door, and Malrek locked behind 7 barriers. Full day of imprisonment completed. 1 million EXP received. Level increased, 100 to 101. The new number appeared without resistance. 100 had not been a wall. It had only been a place no one else possessed enough experience to pass. In the capital, a second obelisk cracked. By sunrise, Imperial riders were already on the road to Black Prison. The Empire did not send negotiators first. 9 days after the obelisks recorded level 101, a column of black armored riders entered the mountain road. They carried no banners. Their horses wore muffled shoes, and every soldier had a strip of gray cloth tied across the mouth. They were the Silent Banner, an Imperial unit used when a threat had to disappear before the public learned its name. Commander Saris Cade led them. She was level 82, 34 years old, and carried 2 narrow swords across her back. Her hair had been cut almost to the scalp on one side, and fell white to her jaw on the other. Bronze eyes watched everything, without lingering. She had ended a palace revolt in 11 minutes, and killed a duke at his own dinner table while his guards were still asking for permission to draw. Saris received Warden Malrek in the outer gatehouse. He attempted to explain the prison's value, the hidden arena, and the danger of damaging the core. Saris placed the sealed Imperial order on the table and told him the details of his corruption had been added to a separate file. Her task was simple: confirm the prisoner's identity, kill him, burn the body, record the death as execution by emergency authority. Malrek had hopes the Empire would remove Artem. Instead, the arrival of a level 82 commander made the warden feel smaller. He led the Silent Banner inward and warned them that the target did not use mana. Saris thought he meant Artem possessed little mana. When she entered the lower corridor, every suppression rune was active. Her soldiers' enchanted equipment dimmed. Artem sat inside his open cell with a chain stretched between his hands. The door had not been unlocked. He had removed it earlier for exercise and replaced it in the frame. Saris stopped 12 paces away. Artem was level 110 by then. He looked 20, perhaps a little older, when the light struck the scar beneath his brow. His black hair had grown unevenly around his ears. The prison shirt no longer fit across his shoulders. Nothing about him resembled the broken stable hand in the intake sketch. "Artem," Saris said. He set the chain down. "You came quietly for someone wearing 30 sets of armor." The Silent Banner trained humor out of recruits during the first year. Saris opened the Imperial Order and stated the charge. The Emperor had authorized immediate death because Artem's continued existence threatened national security. Artem listened without interrupting. "Is the official execution date being changed?" he asked. The question was so specific that Saris paused. "The emergency order supersedes it. Has the prison corps accepted the change?" Malrek answered from behind the soldiers. "It will when you are dead." Artem looked at him. The warden shifted behind his barrier. Saris drew both swords. "You will not leave this corridor." Artem rose. "I was not planning to." The first squad moved before her last word faded. 2 shield bearers advanced in front. Spearmen followed on both sides. A crossbow team on the upper gallery aimed bolts carved from dead magic stone. Saris remained behind the formation, measuring Artem's response. The shield bearers struck their rims together. A physical locking mechanism joined the plates into a moving wall. Their armor could survive a siege engine. Artem stepped forward and placed one hand against the center seam. He stopped them. Boots scraped. Metal groaned. The men behind the shields leaned harder until the spear formation compressed. Artem pushed back. The shield wall slid through the corridor as a single piece, carrying 6 soldiers with it. Saris shouted for the side teams to separate. Artem turned the joined shields half a step, wedging them between the walls. The formation trapped itself. Dead magic bolts fell from above. They were designed to pierce mage barriers and disrupt enchanted flesh. Artem had neither. One bolt struck his shoulder and flattened. Another cut his cheek, leaving a red line that closed while the shooter watched. Saris entered the fight. Her first sword touched Artem's chain. Status resonance flashed through the hostile contact. Saris Cade, level 82. Artem, level 110. She had been trained to act after seeing impossible information. Her face did not change. Her second sword aimed for the eye, the one target she believed could still be vulnerable. Artem tilted his head. The point passed close enough to cut 3 strands of hair. Saris shifted to the throat, then knee, then inside of the elbow. Her swords never stopped. Each attack created the next angle. The narrow corridor favored her precision and kept Artem from moving around the trapped shields. Artem used the chain as a flexible guard. He caught one blade between links, released before Saris could cut the metal, and turned the other strike aside with his forearm. The edge opened his sleeve, but did not reach muscle. Saris understood the difference at once. She was not testing armor. She was testing skin stronger than armor. "Plan Ash," she ordered. The soldiers abandoned the trapped shields and pulled black cylinders from their belts. They threw them against the floor. A chemical flash filled the corridor with white heat and powdered glass. Perception did not vanish with sight. He heard Saris step through the blast and felt the change in air before her sword descended. He caught her wrist. She released the sword, let it fall, and drove 2 fingers toward the wound on his cheek. A small needle extended from her glove. Artem turned her hand. The needle passed his face and struck the brass plate on Captain Bran's jaw behind her. Bran went rigid. The poison was meant to stop a level 100 heart. The force gave her room to retreat. She drew the fallen sword with her foot and caught it in reverse grip. Plan Cinder. 4 soldiers opened the side gates. Harpoons launched from concealed frames, not at Artem, but at the walls around him. Barbed heads buried in stone. Cables crossed the corridor into a tightening web. The formation was designed to immobilize giant beasts, while execution specialists attacked from outside reach. Artem could have broken every cable. Instead, he caught 2 and pulled. The frames tore from their anchors. One crashed through the upper gallery. Crossbowmen jumped aside as stone and wood collapsed. The second frame rolled into the corridor and blocked the remaining squad. Saris used the confusion to reach Malrek, seal the block, and flood it. Malrek hesitated. The flood channel carried alchemical fire. Activating it would kill every prisoner below and damage the core lines. Saris pressed a blade to the green gem in his brow. Imperial Order. The warden raised one hand toward the control panel. Artem crossed the distance. He did not attack Saris. He closed his hand around the sword near Malrek's face. The blade bent between his fingers. Saris released it and struck with the other sword. Artem caught the flat, pulled and removed the weapon from her grip. The corridor fell quiet, except for Bran, choking on the floor. Artem looked at the commander. "Your order is to kill me. The men behind you have seen the difference. You have also seen it." Saris's bronze eyes moved to the trapped squads, the broken gallery, and the bent sword in his hand. Orders do not change because they are difficult. Then, They are poorly written. She drew a short blade from her boot and attacked his throat. Artem moved once. His palm touched the center of her chest. He used less force than he had used against the Iron Maw, less than he had used against Dagon, less than he had used to slide the shield wall. Saris flew through the open gate and struck the opposite wall. Her armor cracked across the breastplate. She dropped to one knee, coughed blood, and tried to stand. Artem faced the rest of the silent banner. Anyone who continues will die. Anyone who leaves will not be followed. The unit had been trained to ignore fear, not arithmetic. One lieutenant ordered a second attack. 3 soldiers obeyed. Artem broke the lieutenant's spear, struck him once in the shoulder, and sent him spinning across the floor. The first soldier swung a hooked blade. Artem caught the hook and pulled him into the second. The third raised an explosive capsule near the prison wall. Artem closed the distance and crushed the capsule inside the man's armored fist before it activated. The pressure broke every bone in the hand. Nobody else advanced. Saris made it to her feet. Her breathing was shallow, but her voice remained steady. Withdraw. The silent banner collected its wounded. They left 6 dead behind, men who had triggered lethal weapons after the warning. The rest moved out in disciplined silence. Captain Bran lay near the wall, still paralyzed. Artem crouched beside him, found the needle lodged in the brass jaw, and pulled it free. The captain's eyes followed the motion. "This does not make us friends," Bran managed. "I was removing litter." Artem set the needle on his chest and returned to his cell. The outer gate remained open for the silent banner's retreat. Sunlight reached the lower stair. Every prisoner knew Artem could follow. Artem returned to the open cell and sat behind bars he could tear apart. Saris looked back once from the gatehouse and saw him there. She had served 3 emperors and eliminated threats in 7 countries. This was the first enemy who refused freedom because captivity benefited him more. Her report reached the capital 5 days later. Target confirmed human. Target level exceeded 100. Direct termination failed. Target declined opportunity to escape. Black prison remains active by target's choice. The first response in the capital was to erase the condemned status. Imperial jurists rejected the idea within an hour. Once a death mark had been accepted by an active prison corps, a commutation required the prisoner's marked consent. An emergency order could authorize force, but it could not rewrite the contract before death. The second response was to shut down the corps. Engineers produced the same answer Artem had found in the maintenance notes. A sudden shutdown endangered the deep seals and the Western Valley. A controlled shutdown required nearly 4 weeks of rerouting, evacuation, and staged release of pressure. Malrek could not simply be removed from the controls. The green gem had grown into his mana channels during 16 years as warden, making him the only operator who could direct the corps at full capacity. Severing the bond safely would take months. The Empire sent 2 examiners and 3 engineers, sealed every official control path, and stripped Malrek of authority outside the chamber. The inspectors did not know about the hidden copper branch that fed the illegal arena. Malrek had kept that line off every official diagram. The Empire stopped treating the situation as a prison disturbance. At level 114, Artem could feel distant armies approaching through vibrations in the mountain road. At level 118, he could identify individual gate mechanisms from the sound of their gears. At level 122, on the 75th day, his aura reached the outer wall, even while fully controlled. Warden Malrek abandoned the lower floors entirely. He lived in the core chamber, with guards, food stores, and 3 escape routes. Orders traveled through speaking tubes. He no longer called Artem a prisoner in private. He called him the occupant. Black prison's practical authority belonged to fear. Prisoners brought Artem the best portion of every meal and waited beyond sight until he finished. Fights stopped when his footsteps entered a corridor. Men who had killed for a blanket asked permission before moving a bench near his cell. His rules fit on 4 lines. Leave the core alone. Do not open the outer gate. Do not enter his cell. Keep the corridors quiet at midnight. Old grudges remained the prisoner's problem. A man who complained that Red Joran had taken 2 loaves received a choice: take them back or accept the loss. Another demanded the execution of a guard accused of torture. Artem walked past him and continued his training. Fear purchased obedience, not justice. The title of king belonged to the men whispering it. Artem still ate, trained, and waited alone. After force failed, the empire chose the only procedure that allowed its full machinery to act without Artem's consent. An emergency killing could be resisted and concealed. An official execution activated every authority built into Black Prison. The core recognized the sentence. The outer army could enter in full strength. The Empire's greatest executioner could use state relics without legal restriction. Engineers continued preparing a controlled shutdown as a reserve, but the Deep Seals made the work slow. Orders arrived on the 78th day. Artem would be executed at sunrise after the 100th completed day of imprisonment, exactly as the original sentence required. The Empire had decided against another transfer. Sarascade's report showed that moving him would only force a battle at the gate, while the remaining days allowed the capital to gather weapons, evacuate the Western Valley, and prepare the Corps' emergency shutdown. The planners believed 22 days of preparation favored them more than Artem's continued growth favored him. For Artem, the decision still meant 22 million more experience. Convoys began arriving. The first carried chains forged from black sky iron, each link as thick as a man's wrist. The second carried 6 execution golems wrapped in red cloth. The third delivered engineers, barrier specialists, physicians, poisoners, and priests trained to destroy corrupted souls. The fourth brought a platform of white stone that had been used to execute dragons during the founding wars. Prisoners watched the equipment pass through the yards. Hopeful men saw a chance to escape during the coming chaos. Practical men started hiding food. Cowards searched for ways to inform on plans that had not yet been made. Artem watched the sky iron chains being tested. A team of 20 guards pulled one length across the lower yard. The links did not bend. Enchanted hammers struck sparks from the surface. The chains were impressive. They were also full of mana. Artem could feel the enchantment, but not use it. The prison suppression fields weakened the links every time they passed over a rune line. Whoever had selected them assumed a high-level prisoner must rely on magical reinforcement. The Empire still did not understand the value of 0 mana. On the 82nd day, the prisoners sent a delegation. Red Joran came from the ordinary blocks. Dagon represented the iron block. Jory came because no one trusted him, and everyone believed that made him useful. 6 other cell leaders stood behind them. None entered Artem's empty circle. Joran explained that more than 800 prisoners were prepared to riot on the morning of the execution. They would seize the armory, open the inner gates, and attack the soldiers from behind, while Artem destroyed the outer defenses. Dagon said little. His one blue eye remained fixed on Artem. He had not offered loyalty, and he did not pretend the uprising was for anyone's freedom. Artem listened until Joran finished. No, he said. Joran had prepared for conditions, not refusal. The prison will be open. We can hold the guards away from you. You cannot. There are 800 of us. There will be several thousand soldiers. Most of you will die before reaching the first gate. Jory smiled nervously. Then perhaps you could protect the advance. Artem looked at him. The smile disappeared. Dagon understood first. He never intended to free us. Correct, Artem said. Joran's hands closed into fists. They call you king. I did not ask them to. We kept order for you. We brought food. We warned you about guards. You did those things because you were afraid. The words were quiet. They left no place for pride to hide. Artem stood. The delegation stepped back together. Do not begin a riot for me. Do not stand behind me. When I leave, remain out of my path. What you do after that is your decision. Dagon nodded once. It was not agreement between allies. It was recognition of a final order from the stronger man. Joran left angry. Jory left thinking about which guard might pay for the conversation. Artem heard him change direction 2 corridors away and allowed the betrayal to continue. A paid informant was more predictable than a frightened one. On the 87th night, the core's vibration changed. Artem was lying awake when the low rhythm beneath the mountain skipped once, returned, then skipped twice. The prison lights dimmed. A faint metallic taste entered the air. Warden Malrek had begun an overload. For 36 days, he had weakened safeguards through the arena's hidden copper branch and disguised the changes as work on the approved shutdown. That night, he locked the Imperial examiners outside the chamber, sent a false contamination warning through the tower, and used 3 arena mages who shared his crimes to force the process 13 days early. The core could not kill Artem directly. It could destroy the prison around him, bury the lower blocks beneath half a mountain, and end the active confinement cycle before the 100th reward. Malrek was about to lose his office, his fortune, and the records that connected him to half the Empire's corrupt nobility. If the mountain collapsed, the unstable core could receive the blame. It was a calculated crime committed by a terrified man. Artem left the cell. 3 gates blocked the route to the tower. He opened the first by sliding his fingers between the steel panels and pulling them apart. The second was protected by a pressure field. He crossed before the field reached full strength. The third had been filled with alchemical flame. He took a breath and ran through it. Fire rolled behind him. His prison clothes burned away at one shoulder. The skin beneath blistered, hardened, and healed before he reached the stair. Captain Bran waited at the top with 40 guards. His brass jaw had been replaced after the poison damage, but the new plate was plain iron. He raised his sword and told the guards to hold formation. His voice lacked conviction. "The core is overloading," Artem said. "I know. Move." Bran looked toward the chamber door. Malrek had ordered him to delay Artem for 30 seconds. The captain had spent 20 years obeying orders because they placed other men beneath him. Now obedience meant dying for a warden who planned to bury everyone. He stepped aside. The guards followed. Bran remained beside his guards while Artem passed. The choice was self-preservation, not loyalty. The core chamber door had been sealed with 7 rotating locks. Artem gripped the central wheel and turned. Gears screamed inside the wall. One lock broke, then another. He set it down and pushed the door inward. Warden Malrek stood on a platform above a sphere of green light. Copper roots connected the sphere to the floor, walls, and ceiling. Energy raced through them in violent pulses. Cracks spread across the crystal casing. 3 senior mages from the hidden arena chanted around the platform. They had dismissed the Imperial engineers with Malrek's false warning. Their task was to direct the explosion downward, so that the mountain collapsed into the prison rather than outward toward the road. Malrek wore full battle robes. The gem in his forehead had grown into a crown of green crystal across one side of his face. "You should have left when I opened the gate," he said. "You should have waited 13 days. Malrek laughed. The sound shook with exhaustion. "So it is the days. Every midnight, every complete day in my prison." Artem stepped toward the platform. The warden raised both hands. The core answered. Gravity struck Artem from 4 directions. The floor split beneath his feet. Chains burst from the walls and wrapped his arms. Green blades formed in the air, each one connected to the core's vast mana reserve. Artem planted one foot and held. The attack had enough force to pin a level 80 beast. At level 132, it bent his knees. Malrek intensified the field. "You grew because I kept this place alive. I can still take it away." Artem pulled his right arm inward. A chain anchor tore from the wall. He pulled the left. Stone burst across the chamber. The green blades fell. He crossed his arms. Mana cut shallow lines across his skin, but the blades broke against bone and dispersed. Artem stepped onto the platform. The first mage tried to redirect the core into him. Artem struck the staff from her hands. It embedded itself in the ceiling. The second formed a barrier. Artem walked through it, the transparent surface folding around his shoulders before it shattered. Dead mages might let the overload run uncontrolled. Artem knocked each one unconscious with a measured strike and left them breathing beside the platform. Malrek drew power directly into his body. Green armor covered him. His level remained 65, but the core supplied force far beyond his personal limit. He moved faster than he had in the gatehouse and drove a glowing fist into Artem's chest. The impact cracked the platform. Artem slid one step. Malrek's eyes widened. Artem caught the next punch and closed his fingers around the green armor. Mana flared. The warden tried to pull free. Artem held him in place. Stop the overload. It cannot be stopped now. Artem looked toward the control ring around the core. 3 black keys had been turned inward. A 4th lever remained locked beneath Malrek's hand seal. He broke the warden's wrist. Malrek screamed. The hand seal opened. Artem dragged him to the control ring and forced the broken hand against the lever. The pressure will reverse through the upper lines. The tower will collapse. Then open the vents. Malrek stared at him. You understand the core? Artem could hear its parts. At level 132, every vibration had become a diagram. He knew which channels carried pressure, because the copper sang at different pitches. I understand what is about to break. He pointed to 2 valves. Malrek refused to move. Artem tightened his grip on the broken wrist. The warden opened the vents. Green light shot through the tower roof in a column visible for 50 miles. The mountain shook. Cracks raced across the chamber walls, but the downward pressure eased. Artem turned the 3 black keys in reverse order. The first burned his palm. The second resisted until he tore the socket loose. The third snapped into place. The core's scream dropped to a deep hum. The overload ended. Malrek collapsed against the control ring, holding his wrist. Artem looked down at him. You may destroy it after the sentence ends. The warden breathed through clenched teeth. You think you own this prison? No, I am renting it. Artem returned to his cell, while engineers rushed toward the damaged tower. Bran watched him pass and said nothing. The Imperial examiners found the hidden copper branch within an hour. They arrested the 3 arena mages and formally suspended Malrek. Removing him from the core was still impossible before the execution. The gem in his skull had become part of the operating circuit, and cutting it free could destabilize the deep seals. They locked a control collar around his throat, stationed 2 Imperial mages beside him, and postponed his trial until the prison no longer depended on his body. The incident settled the last question inside Black Prison. Artem was staying for the reward and would preserve the machine until the sentence ended, even against the operator bound to it. The final days passed under a strange peace. Day 90 brought level 134. By then, ordinary weapons could not cut Artem unless wielded by someone near the peak of the world. His wounds closed in moments. He could hear conversations in the tower from the lower yard and distinguish the heartbeats of men lying. He needed less sleep, though he continued to rest because waiting was easier when divided by dreams. On day 92, the Imperial engineers completed a ring of emergency anchor stones around the deep vaults and river channels. They transferred the mountain seals away from the central sphere, 1 circuit at a time. The prison core still controlled the sentence, gates, chains, and barriers, but its destruction would no longer collapse the Western Valley or release the creatures below. Malrek's early overload had been deadly because he had triggered it before that transfer was complete. The Imperial Executioner arrived on day 94. Sir Cale Varys entered wearing a white mantle over gold-edged armor. He was 61, with long dark hair tied at the neck, and eyes the pale amber of old glass. At level 97, he was officially the strongest warrior who served the Empire directly. His sword, Dawn Verdict, had ended rebels, monsters, and 1 prince accused of treason. Cale did not visit Artem's cell. He inspected the yard, tested the execution platform, examined the sky iron chains, and questioned the suspended warden under the eyes of 2 Imperial mages. Unlike Saras Cade, he did not underestimate the report. He ordered the barriers doubled and the soldiers positioned far enough apart that a single strike could not kill a formation. He also ordered civilians and noble spectators kept away. That decision saved lives. On the 99th evening, Malrek came to Artem with one final offer. 2 Imperial guards followed him. His broken wrist had been bound in silver splints, and a control collar circled his throat. The cracked gem still spread across his temple, but its light had weakened. He carried an Imperial pardon. "The Emperor will cancel the execution," Malrek said. "You will leave Black Prison tomorrow as a sworn weapon of the throne. Estates, gold, any title below prince. You will be given legal protection for every act committed here." Artem read the parchment through the bars. The seal was genuine. Because the condemned mark was a 2-party judicial contract, even an Imperial pardon remained an offer until the prisoner accepted it with marked blood. The safeguard that prevented forged releases now protected Artem's final reward. 1 thumbprint would grant freedom before midnight. It would also end the official sentence and cost the final million experience. "Return in the morning," Artem said. Malrek mistook the answer for hesitation. Relief softened his face for the first time in months. A wise choice. He left the pardon on the table outside the cell. All night, guards whispered that the monster had finally accepted service. Jory sold the rumor to 3 different blocks. Some prisoners cursed Artem for abandoning them. Others began planning how to attach themselves to his future household. Artem sat with his back against the wall and listened to the prison bell mechanism prepare. At midnight, the 100th full day ended. Full day of imprisonment completed. 1 million EXP received. Total imprisonment reward, 100 million EXP. Current level, 141. Experience stored toward level 142, 1,300,000. Of 1,410,000. Official confinement cycle complete. No further daily rewards are available under this sentence. Condemned status remains active until execution procedure begins or the sentence is revoked. Warmth moved through Artem one final time. The prison mark beneath his collarbone darkened, then became still. He looked at the unsigned pardon beyond the bars. The Empire believed it had offered him a future. It had arrived, one midnight, too late. Sunrise reached Black Prison as a thin red line across the mountain peaks. The execution bell began before the light touched the outer wall. 300 soldiers entered the lower block. Their boots struck in measured rhythm. Priests carried censers of silver smoke. Engineers rolled suppression pylons into the corridors. 6 red-clad golems waited in the yard, each twice the height of a man, and built around a spear of white stone. Captain Bran approached Artem's cell with the sky iron chains. The captain had dressed in formal armor. The iron plate on his jaw had been polished until it reflected the torchlight. He did not bring the pardon. Malrek came behind him under guard and held it through the bars. "The offer remains," Malrek said. "Press your thumb to the seal, and this ends." Artem stood from the stone bed. His last prison shirt had been washed for the execution. It was gray, plain, and too tight across the chest. His black hair had been cut unevenly by a guard who refused to stand close enough for proper work. The scar under his brow remained visible. His gray eyes looked almost silver in the morning light. He took the parchment, folded it once, and handed it back. "No." Malrek's fingers tightened around the pardon. "You asked me to return in the morning. I asked you to wait until morning." His face lost what little color prison life had left in it. Artem held out his wrists. Bran locked the first sky iron cuff around them. The enchantments flared, searched for mana, and found none. 4 soldiers attached chains to the waist ring. 6 more secured the ankles. Additional length crossed his shoulders and neck. The complete restraint weighed more than a loaded wagon. Artem let it settle. Teams of guards lifted the loose sections. Each chain required several men to prevent it from dragging. Artem could have carried all of it with one hand. Bran checked every lock. "Why cooperate?" he asked quietly. "The procedure has begun." A system line confirmed it. Official execution procedure active. Confinement cycle concluded. Daily imprisonment rewards suspended. Artem looked toward the corridor. There is nothing left to protect. Bran stepped away. The procession climbed through Black Prison. Every cell door remained locked, but faces filled the bars. Ordinary prisoners pressed against one another for a view. The iron block stood in silence. Dagon watched with arms folded, his silver braid over one shoulder. Red Joran gripped the bars hard enough to whiten his knuckles. Jory had positioned himself near the front and was already calculating which version of the morning would be most profitable if he survived it. Nobody cheered. They had seen Artem break chains, gates, beasts, and soldiers. They had also seen the Empire spend weeks preparing one clean attempt. The execution yard held enough force to crush an army. Hope and fear had become difficult to separate. When Artem entered the yard, the prisoners above dropped to their knees, one row after another. No order caused it. His controlled aura was still too heavy for many of them to stand this close. The execution platform waited at the center. White stone rose above a circle of black runes. 6 golems formed a ring around it. Barrier mages stood at 8 points beyond them. Crossbow teams covered the walls. The outer gates had been sealed with 3 independent mechanisms. Sir Kale Varys waited beside the block. Dawn Verdict rested across his palms. The sword had a gold edge and a white blade with no reflection. It was long enough to cut through a horse's neck in one stroke. Kale's amber eyes moved over Artem's chains, posture, and breathing. He also saw no effort. The executioner raised one hand. The yard became silent. A herald read the sentence. Artem Vey, stable hand of the Western Estates, had been convicted of causing the deaths of 12 noble officers through deliberate false guidance and conspiracy with mountain raiders. The original owner of the body had been innocent. Artem knew that from memories of a map changed after it left his hands, and a noble heir who needed someone poor enough to condemn. The lie no longer mattered to the execution. It might matter after he left. The herald finished and stepped back. Kneel. Artem climbed the steps and stood before the block. I'd prefer standing. The executioner did not argue. He had killed proud men before. Pride usually became panic when the sword moved. Kale took Artem by the shoulder to turn him into position. Hostile intent passed through the contact. Status resonance opened. Sir Kale Varys, level 97. Artem, level 141. The executioner's hand stopped. For the first time that morning, the calm in his amber eyes broke. His fingers remained on Artem's shoulder, while he read the number again, as if the status might correct itself. It did not. Artem looked at him. Something wrong? Kale released the shoulder. Behind the platform, Malrek whispered for him to continue. The barrier mages could not see the level. The soldiers saw only the Empire's strongest executioner standing very still. Kale stepped back and lifted Dawn Verdict. He had a duty, and duty had carried him through worse fear than this. He placed both hands on the hilt. Golden light moved along the blade as the sword drew mana from the execution platform, the golems, and the state seal hanging at his throat. The technique was called Final Sunrise. It had split a level 91 storm serpent from skull to tail. Kale swung. The sword descended faster than the watching soldiers could follow. Golden force compressed around the edge, focused into a line thinner than hair. It struck the side of Artem's neck. A sound like a cathedral bell filled the yard. Dawn Verdict stopped. A shallow white mark appeared on Artem's skin. The sword cracked at the center. Kale saw the fracture spread toward his hands. He released the hilt and moved back before the blade broke into 3 pieces. The golden light burst outward. Barrier mages raised shields to protect the soldiers from their own execution weapon. The top half of Dawn Verdict struck the platform and stood quivering in the stone. Artem rolled his neck once. The white mark faded. Captain Bran closed his eyes. The destruction of Dawn Verdict triggered the prison's highest emergency protocol under Kale's state seal. Malrek's control collar opened, returning full access to the only living operator linked to the core. Malrek shouted, "Activate everything." The yard erupted. The sky iron chains tightened in 6 directions. Teams of soldiers ran winches from the walls. The execution golems drove their white spears into the ground and projected a cage of red force around the platform. Suppression pylons overloaded, darkening every magic item inside the circle, except those connected directly to the core. The system had prepared to restrain mana. Artem had none. He opened his hands. The wrist chain broke first. The sound was sharp and small beneath the roar of machinery. He pulled his arms apart. Sky iron links snapped one after another. Soldiers at the winches lost their footing as tension vanished. Artem stepped forward, and the waist chains broke against his movement. The collar held for half a second longer. He placed 2 fingers beneath it and tore it open. The pieces struck the platform hard enough to crater the white stone. One execution golem attacked. Its spear came down at Artem's chest, with enough force to drive through a fortress gate. Artem caught the shaft. He turned, used the golem's momentum, and swung the entire construct into the second. Red armor folded. Both giants crossed the yard and crashed through the base of a watchtower. Soldiers on the upper platform jumped as the structure leaned outward. Artem caught the fallen section with one hand before it crushed the ranks below. For a moment, hundreds of soldiers stared up at him, holding a stone tower above his head. He set it down to the side. That act frightened them more than letting it fall would have. A monster might ignore their lives. Artem had noticed them and saved them without treating the weight as significant. Kale recovered the lower half of Dawn Verdict. The broken relic and the state seal at his throat fed power into an aura edge far sharper than level 97 could produce alone. He attacked from Artem's blind side and changed the line twice before the first cut arrived. Artem turned. The broken blade scraped his shirt. Kale's aura crossed the forearm and left a thin red line. The executioner stepped away, breathing harder. So you can bleed. Kale spent everything on the next sequence. The broken sword hid the aura blade as his stance shifted from low to high, then folded beneath Artem's arm. He aimed at the eye, throat, knee, and old scar under the brow. White cuts crossed the platform and split the execution block behind them. Months of watching fighters had trained Artem to connect weight shifts with intent. Level 141 gave him time to read choices Kale made in fractions of a second. He redirected the sword wrist with a broken chain link, stepped through the final crossing cuts, and let one edge touch his cheek. Before Kale could change direction again, Artem caught his forearm and struck once beneath the breastplate with carefully measured force. The armor caved inward. Kale crossed the platform, broke through the white block, and landed among fragments of stone. He forced himself onto one knee, but his chest would not let him rise farther. Artem stepped down from the platform. Stay there. Kale looked at the ruined blade and the cut already closing on Artem's cheek. He lowered the sword. The crossbow commander gave the order to fire. Hundreds of bolts filled the yard. Artem seized a loose length of sky iron chain and swung it overhead. The links became a dark circle. Bolts struck the moving chain, shattered, or flew upward. Several passed through. They flattened against his shoulders and chest. He snapped the chain forward. It crossed the yard, wrapped around the central crossbow frame, and pulled the entire weapon from the wall. Artem guided its fall into the empty sand between formations. The impact buried the frame without crushing a soldier. Stop firing, Kale shouted. The commander hesitated. Malrek countermanded him from the tower. The second volley began. Artem moved. Soldiers saw the sand rise in a line toward the wall. Then he stood beside the commander. He removed the man's sword, broke it, and placed both halves on the parapet. There will not be a third volley. The commander nodded. Across the yard, the remaining 4 golems charged together. Their formation linked the red barriers between their spears, creating a moving cage. Artem jumped from the wall and landed inside it. The golems closed. He struck the ground. The yard floor lifted in a circular wave. White stone split. All 4 golems lost balance. Artem caught the nearest by its spear arm and used it as a lever, turning the construct through the formation. Red armor collided. The linked barrier folded inward and tore through the golem's own joints. One remained upright. It raised both fists. Artem punched the center of its chest. The armor did not explode. It compressed around his fist, and the force traveled through the body into the core crystal. The crystal shattered. The golem froze, fists suspended above him. Artem withdrew his hand. The construct fell backward. No soldier advanced after that. Malrek activated the central core. Green light poured from every rune in Black Prison. Gates slammed shut. Chains withdrew into the walls. The yard barriers rose into a dome, cutting Artem off from the outer ranks, and trapping Malrek, Kale, Bran, and the remaining golems inside. The tower opened along hidden seams. Stone plates moved like armor. The core's copper roots extended across the yard and connected to the execution platform. Malrek stood on the highest balcony, with the crystal crown covering half his face. He had bound himself to the prison more deeply than before. Green armor formed around his body. Behind him, the core projected a giant figure made from walls, gates, and mana lines. This prison held creatures stronger than kingdoms. Malrek called, "It will hold you." Artem looked around the dome. The execution procedure had ended the reward. The core no longer had value. "You should not have reminded me." Malrek attacked with the entire prison. Gravity crushed the yard. Stone hands rose from the floor. Green lances descended from the dome. Every remaining chain targeted Artem's limbs. The giant figure behind Malrek mirrored the warden's movement and drove one fist downward. Artem wrapped the sky iron chain around his forearm. He ran. Gravity fractured the ground under each step, but it could not stop him. He passed between the first stone hands, jumped onto the wrist of the second, and used it as a platform. Green lances followed. He changed direction in the air by throwing the chain around a copper root and pulling himself sideways. The giant fist struck where he had been. The execution platform disappeared beneath a crater. Malrek redirected the prison figure. Its other hand swept across the yard. Artem landed on the moving fingers and ran along them toward the tower. The warden increased gravity around the arm. Artem's feet sank into green stone. Chains wrapped his waist. Malrek smiled and closed the giant hand. Artem planted both hands against two fingers. The giant fist stopped closing. Cracks spread across the projected stone. Artem pushed the fingers apart and tore free. The pressure wave shattered windows across the tower. He launched from the broken hand and crossed the remaining distance. Malrek formed 7 barriers in front of the balcony. Artem passed through the first. It burst behind him. The second slowed him enough to bend around his shoulders. He struck the third with the chain. The link carried the impact through the next 2 barriers and cracked all of them at once. The sixth was tied directly to the core. Artem seized its surface with both hands. Green fire climbed his arms. He pulled. The barrier tore open like cloth. Malrek stood behind the 7th, with blood running from the cracked gem. "You needed this place." "I did. Every level came from my prison." Yes, the answer angered Malrek more than denial. He wanted Artem to hate him, to claim independence from the cage, to pretend the 100 days had not mattered. Artem had no need to rewrite the truth. The prison had made him stronger. Malrek had made the mistake of keeping it intact long enough. The warden gathered the core into one final spear. Every green line in the prison dimmed. The giant figure collapsed into light that flowed toward his hand. The spear grew brighter until the balcony stone melted beneath his boots. Kale shouted for the soldiers outside the dome to take cover. Malrek threw. Artem saw the point, the pressure around it, and the copper root feeding power from the core. He stepped aside from the direct line and wrapped the chain around the spear's shaft. The sky iron enchantments failed under the suppression field, but the metal remained strong. Artem turned with the throw. The spear curved. Malrek's own attack drove into the 7th barrier from behind. The barrier shattered. The explosion tore the tower balcony away. Artem moved through green fire, reached Malrek, and caught him by the front of his armor before he fell. The warden hung above the yard. Half the crystal crown had broken from his face. He looked old, exhausted, and merely ordinary. "Kill me," he said. Artem looked toward the core chamber behind him. The crystal sphere had opened. Light pulsed inside it, unstable after the final attack. "You are not the important part." He threw Malrek onto the remaining balcony floor. The warden rolled, struck a pillar, and lay still. Artem entered the core chamber. Copper roots tightened around the sphere, as if the prison understood what he intended. Gates throughout the mountain locked. Warning bells rang. The core formed one last barrier around itself. Artem placed his hand against it. For 100 days, that sphere had defined the active boundary. It had recorded his sentence, powered the chains, and turned every completed midnight into a million experience. Keeping it alive had been rational. Beyond the tower walls, the new anchor stones held the deep seals in a steady, layered rhythm. Only the prison functions remained inside the sphere. The sentence was over. He drew back his fist. The strike passed through the barrier, crystal casing, and central light in one motion. The core broke. The severed link recoiled through every operator channel. On the ruined balcony, the crystal crown across Malrek's face shattered. Green light burned through his mana pathways and vanished. He remained alive, but the core would never answer him again. A pulse moved through Black Prison. Every rune went dark. Every locked door released. The outer gates opened under their own weight. Suppression fields vanished. Chains fell loose from the walls. The dome above the yard dissolved into green sparks that the morning wind carried toward the mountain. Silence followed. Then 800 prisoners began shouting. Cell doors stood open. Men poured into corridors, laughing, crying, and calling Artem their king. Joran led the ordinary blocks toward the yard. Dagon walked from the iron block with no chain on his ankles for the first time in years. Jory emerged behind everyone else, close enough to current participation and far enough to survive resistance. They reached the broken execution platform as Artem descended from the tower. Joran raised one fist. "The gates are open. We follow you." The shout spread. "We follow the king. Black Prison is ours. Lead us out." Artem stopped before them. The pressure of his aura crossed the yard. Cheers died row by row. Prisoners, who had surged forward, halted. Some dropped to one knee again. Dagon remained standing, but his shoulders lowered beneath the weight. Artem looked over the faces. These men had brought food because they feared hunger less than him. They had warned him because information bought safety. They had obeyed because disobedience looked dangerous. A few had fought beside each other. None had fought beside Artem. "You were never my people," he said. Joran's raised fist lowered. Artem continued. "I am leaving alone. Stay inside the inner yards until I am beyond the mountain. Anyone who enters my path will return through the nearest wall." The crowd opened a corridor. Soldiers stood beyond the ruined barriers, weapons in hand, but Kale raised one arm and ordered them to remain still. The executioner was on his feet again, one hand pressed to the damaged breastplate. Artem passed him. Kale looked at the fading cut on Artem's cheek. "What will you do outside?" "Decide for myself." It was the only answer he owed. Kale used the silence to retake command. He ordered shield lines across the outer arch, manual chains fixed to the road gates, and engineers sent to the emergency winches. The core was dead, but several thousand Imperial soldiers still ringed the mountain. Open cells did not become an open road. A medical squad carried Malrek from the tower on a stretcher. The green crystal was gone, leaving black scars across his temple. Kale ordered him chained and kept alive for trial on charges of illegal executions, theft from the treasury, forged records, and the unauthorized overload. Too many Imperial officers had seen the evidence for the case to disappear with another bribe. Captain Bran stood near the gatehouse with his sword sheathed. Artem walked by without speaking. They had shared 100 days as prisoner and jailer. Survival had made them cautious around each other. Inside the cracked gatehouse, Artem removed a linen-wrapped bundle from behind a loose stone. The copied roadmap, old wool cloak, dried rations, and 12 silver crowns were exactly where he had left them. He pulled the cloak over his torn shirt and tied the bundle across his back. The outer gates of Black Prison stood open to the mountain road. Artem crossed the boundary. Fresh air carried pine, cold stone, horse sweat, and distant rain. Sunlight touched his face without passing through bars. The prison mark beneath his collarbone cooled. A final message appeared. First official confinement cycle completed. Active prison boundary exited. Daily imprisonment reward suspended. Accumulated level retained. Current level 141. Next cycle requirement: official confinement inside a higher containment class facility. Eligible facility within current range? None. Artem took another step. Behind him, Black Prison remained full of unlocked cells, defeated soldiers, and criminals, testing how far his last order extended. Kale's shield line closed across the outer arch before the first man reached it. None followed Artem onto the road. In the imperial capital, the main threat obelisk lit at the same moment. Scribes crowded the circular hall. The obelisk had already cracked at levels 100 and 101. Now every measurement line burned white. A new number carved itself into the black stone. 141. The obelisk split from top to base. In a tower overlooking the capital, the strongest officially recorded human opened his eyes. Grandmaster Oren Vale had remained at level 99 for 37 years. He felt the distant pressure vanish beyond the western mountains, and understood that the world had produced something the old scale could not contain. The Emperor received Saris Cade's second report before noon. Black Prison Core destroyed. Execution failed. Warden Malrek alive and detained. External perimeter restored. Emergency prisoner transfers required. Sir Kale Varys defeated. Target exited alone. Confirmed level 141. Upper limit unknown. Imperial ministers gathered around a map of state prisons. Black Prison was marked as the Empire's strongest conventional human death prison. On the separate scale used for catastrophic entities, it ranked only as a third-class containment fortress. Two anomaly prisons stood above it. The first was Deep Meridian, built beneath the sea for creatures that could poison a coastline. The second was a fortress no living human prisoner had entered. It floated above the northern storms, chained between mountain peaks, with walls made to survive national catastrophe. Its name was Sky Cage. The ministers stared at the symbol and discussed bait, armies, false charges, and the possibility of offering Artem a pardon he had already rejected. Far from the capital, Artem walked down the mountain road. He carried no sword, title, or companion. A plain wool cloak covered the torn prison clothes, and the linen bundle against his back held enough food and silver to reach Greybank without begging from anyone. The 100 million experience remained inside a body the Empire had sentenced to die. Every step covered more ground than it should, so he slowed to an ordinary pace and listened to the forest. Birds returned after his aura settled. Wind moved through pine branches. Somewhere below, a merchant wagon rattled over a bridge. For 100 days, other people had decided when he woke, when he ate, where he stood, and when he was supposed to die. At the foot of the mountain, the western road bent toward the capital. The eastern road led to Greybank, and then toward the estates, where Lord Evren Halvek had changed one map and condemned a stable hand. The Empire could plan its next cage. Artem turned east to ask why 12 officers had needed an innocent man to die.